Should be almost there. Mallory will give me the for sure when we get there. All right. Come back to Zoom. All right, we are here. We are on Facebook Live. Good morning. Thank you so much to those of you watching or anybody tuning in later to watch this recorded. Thanks for being here. This is our last Sunday morning candidate coffee. There's one more Sunday before the election, but we will be doing some here and there short Facebook Lives and not doing a conversation with a guest. And so before we dive in with today's guest, which I'm really excited about, just reminding folks, please get your ballots in as soon as possible. Really important to vote your ballot all the way from the top of the ticket on down. Sometimes there's local races you may not be familiar with that take a little bit of research, and there are a lot of ballot measures on your ballot this year too that deserve your attention and a little bit of research. So maybe I'll do a Facebook Live later talking about those. But for now, I want to get to it and use our time with our guest this morning, Matt McRae. Really excited to have Matt with us today. Matt is the climate policy strategist for Our Children's Trust, which is a Eugene-based nonprofit supporting youth who are using the courts to compel government action on climate change. Matt earned a Bachelor's of Science from the College of Natural Resources at Utah State University. And from 2008 to 2016, Matt worked as the climate and energy analyst for the city of Eugene, where he was the project manager for Eugene's first climate and energy action plan, and Eugene's 20-minute neighborhoods assessment, and the 2014 update of Eugene's natural hazards mitigation plan. Prior to moving to Eugene, Matt worked for the National Park Service for 9 years, and he is commissioner-elect for the Eugene Water and Electric Board, or EWEB, and he will be sworn in and begin serving there in January. Matt is also a neighbor and a friend, and I'm so appreciative that he's taking a little bit of time out of his Sunday morning to chat with us. And from his bio, you can tell why I want to talk to Matt. We're going to have a great conversation, and I'm going to kick it off by welcoming you, thanking you, Matt, for being here, and asking you to share a few words to start about what made you decide to run for office, and specifically an EWEB position and the opportunities for utilities and the county to work together.
Thanks. Well, thank you again for the invitation to be here. I guess my motivation for sitting on the EWEB board is that there are a lot of opportunities queued up in the very near future, like over the next several years, for us to steer a course towards a lower carbon community-wide future. So that that's really it for me. I have been accused of wearing carbon goggles where I think about only climate change, and I try my darndest not to do that. But it's definitely, a major focus for my current, my employment, but also outside of my work. My activism tends to be focused on trying to address climate change in one way or another. And EWEB, I think everybody's familiar probably with Eugene Water and Electric Board. It's our local utility. They provide both water and electricity. And so there are a lot of decisions there about what our electricity looks like, where our electricity is sourced from, as well as caring for the quality of our drinking water. And EWEB is known for doing work upstream, not just treating the water as it comes in the pipes, but making sure that the water as it's flowing down the river is as clean as possible too. So we can get into that more if there's interest there. But really that's my motivation is to be involved and help steer a course towards a lower carbon transition. And we, as you know, we just don't have a long time to do this. We have waited so long. We've got best available science suggests 30 years to get at least almost all the way off or completely off of fossil fuels. So there's no time to waste.
Great, thank you for that. And I love, you use the word upstream, which is something, as folks who are watching may know, I've been running for this seat for county commissioner for the better part of 2 years now. And what initially motivated me to run was back well more than 8 years ago. closer to 12 now, when I was running a nonprofit called Elche. And actually, I think that's when you and I first met, because your wife Holly was working on school food, reimagining school food at that time. And we worked really closely with the Kids Food Matters folks at Elche, the Lane Coalition for Healthy Active Youth. But we were a public health nonprofit working on systems and environment change and policy to create communities and systems and environments that made it easier for families to make healthier choices. And that upstream approach is a classic public health model, right? If we address a problem early on, then everything that flows downward from there is a healthier, better choice, as opposed to waiting until we have a disaster downstream on our hands that we're all being impacted by and harmed by, and then have to figure out ways to intervene. So I love that you use the word upstream. I'm a fan, and I'm a firm believer. And when you talk about carbon goggles, I think we all have our own goggles that we look through, the sort of, or the door that we enter a particular building through, right? But once we're in there, we're all in the building together.
Right.
And that's why I've been talking about this public health lens, because whether it's climate, whether it's addressing racism and dismantling white supremacy and other systems of oppression, whether it's talking about housing and addressing homelessness, we have to take that upstream approach. At the same time, we have to address the downstream impacts of the fact that we haven't been taking an upstream approach.
Right.
So if you could talk a little bit about maybe a little bit, particularly with water. I think there are people concerned about water quality in light of the holiday farm fires.
Yeah.
Shed, if you wanted to say a little bit about both what can happen upstream now to protect the future of water quality in light of the fires, and what is EWEB doing to ensure the water quality is safe for all of us drinking it now in the aftermath of the fires.
Yeah, I'll address those. I want to make one note, because you were talking about just the we enter into issues through one door, but they're all together. I think that's one of the things that is so crucial about this time, is that there are so many problems that are also interrelated, and as we solve one of them, if we do it right, we also solve some of the others. One of the things that we did when we worked on the Climate Action Plan in 2010 was a health impact assessment, and we had the folks from Upstream Public Health in Portland come down and look at the intersections. And so if we do these climate actions that address transportation, what are the health consequences, the outcomes associated with that? Just making a point that the intersections of these huge challenges in front of us are very obvious or clear when we start to look at them closely. They're I don't think obvious is the right word, because they're not, but they're clear when we start to ask the question about how they're related.
Yes, exactly. And the importance of those health impact assessments, as you know, is, and I'm glad you worked with the folks at Upstream, they're good colleagues of mine, is that we don't all experience the impacts the same way. We're not all affected the same way. Right. So those issues of disparities are also addressed when we use that public health lens. So great.
Yeah,
thanks.
agreed.
But yeah, continue on about water quality.
I'll put a giant caveat on my comments here regarding EWEB's role, is that I'm not a sitting commissioner, and so I can't and don't formally speak on behalf of EWEB, but I can share with you what my understanding is of EWEB's current actions and how they relate to water quality upstream. And that is that EWEB is working with a number of other partners, including Lane County and Mackenzie River Trust and the watershed councils in the area, doing rapid assessments and looking at what actions they can take right now. What are the high priority actions they can take, both to make sure that pollutants don't get into the water to the greatest extent possible. So for example, in places where homes were completely lost, they're going and cleaning the sites, not everywhere, but in high priority places where they have permission from the landowner. They're moving this coalition, not necessarily EWEB by themselves, are moving potential contaminants onto the foundation where the home rested to prevent those from being washed into the river. They're also doing as quickly as they can, as you know, it's getting colder, and so doing seeding, grass seeding and whatnot for erosion control becomes difficult as it gets colder and wetter. But they are doing very quickly, very proactive erosion control to try and stabilize the banks of the river and areas that are prone to landslides. In fact, my understanding is that Northwest Youth Corps has been hired to do a bunch of that on the ground work of, erosion control prevention devices, installing all kinds of different erosion control devices to prevent soil and contaminants from being washed down into the river this winter as the rains pick up.
Great.
Yeah, so that's my understanding. And in terms of water quality, I would also add that I know that EWEB has made some significant upgrades to the water treatment facility recently that enable a really high degree of confidence that our water remains clean, even through kind of unexpected or extreme events like this fire has and the erosion that will undoubtedly follow. I know EWEB is super careful about their water quality and making sure that it's adequately treated. That said, pulling contaminants like, as I understand it, pulling chemicals out of the water is harder than pulling bacteria out of the water. They're kind of different treatments. Most water treatment facilities have been set up to deal with bacteria, but not as much around chemicals. And so, trying to prevent those chemicals from going into the river in the first place is a really high priority.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. That's great. And I know right on the heels of the fire, I had those concerns about water quality, and EWEB was doing a great job on their website of keeping people updated. So if folks are watching and they want to learn more and get a little more into the particulars, just encourage you to visit EWEB's website if you're a customer and you want to know what's happening with water quality and how they're addressing that.
Yeah, I would.
So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Do you have some thoughts you want to share about whether it's connected to what we've just been talking about or otherwise specifically about utility companies and the county, local government working together, whether on water quality specifically, but also more broadly around future mitigation of wildfires and their impact and other issues around climate and environmental protections where utilities and counties can work together?
Sure. That is a huge opening of potential for conversation there. And so I'll narrow in on a few things that seem most relevant to me, but ask you to ask questions if I've missed something that you want to speak to. But there are certainly, there's a lot of potential for the county and EWEB to work together on wildfire recovery as is happening right now. And from my understanding, and again, I'm not in the thick of this, but from what I see and hear, Lane County and EWEB are partnering very closely, as I said, with a number of other partners to work on recovery. So I think that opportunity is being taken to make sure that we're, working together and getting the, not duplicating effort and using resources as wisely as possible. There certainly are opportunities for reducing the risk of wildfire. A lot of those would fall under the umbrella of the county because the county manages the land use code and building code, and so has tools available there to, as well as incentives to encourage homeowners to provide defensible space, right, which is just the practice of reducing flammable materials immediately close to a home so that it's easier for a fire crew to keep a house from building down in the middle of a firestorm. I'm not suggesting that if that's a solution that solves the problem, but it can improve the likelihood of homes making it through a major wildfire. And I suspect we'll see more activity along those lines in the coming years. We, as a community, haven't really experienced an event like the Holiday Farm fire. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that 100 years ago there were fires like this that people experienced, but there weren't as many homes. And so I think the tragedy that has happened upstream on the Mackenzie is going to catalyze some more proactive actions. I know that EWEB is also considering a formal policy of, for example, for powering down when conditions become possible to create a wildfire like that. So when we have high winds and really dry and warm conditions, I know EWEB is, the board is currently considering some options to address that type of situation by proactively powering down the way many utilities in California are now doing. And then I'll go to one other area where I think there's a lot of potential when it comes to climate or energy policy, and that is in transportation, right? Transportation is a significant portion of our collective greenhouse gas footprint. And one of the things that we will need to do in the next 30 years is adopt pretty much completely electric vehicles for light duty vehicles and electric vehicles for as many heavy duty vehicles as we can. We really are going to have to shift off of fossil fuels to electric vehicles, which thankfully that technology is really expanding very quickly. The range of vehicles, the ability of a vehicle to go several hundred miles on a charge is becoming commonplace. And so that transition, I think, is going to be really doable, but it also requires charging stations, which is a place where the county and a utility will have to work together to create a really solid network of charging facilities across our entire county. Right, if I'm in Eugene and I'm thinking about buying an electric vehicle, my ability to drive out to the coast and travel up and down the coast for a weekend is one of the calculations that I put in my head when I'm thinking about, will this electric vehicle serve my needs?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, among others. But those are the two, I think, biggest opportunities that come to mind for me.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for that. So that's a great jumping off point to maybe talk a little bit about the county's climate action plan that was just adopted, just in the process of seating the advisory board that will dig in deep to that plan, do a lot of the, antenna out into the community to get input and bring that back so that the commissioners are better tuned into what's happening in the broader community and how people are experiencing and thinking about this climate action plan. But as someone who was in that role with the city of Eugene for a long time and has been following these issues, what can you share with us about what you see as being of a special promise, especially promising, that's been outlined in the county's climate action plan, and your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say one a clarification is that the county, thankfully, and I really appreciate the board for providing direction to staff to create a climate action plan, and they've hired somebody to do that work, but the plan hasn't been right. They're just, as you were just saying, in the initial phases. So the plan isn't set yet. They're just in the starting phases of trying to figure out what goes in this plan, how to organize it. And there's, as I understand it, there's 3 phases that they're looking at, and the phasing may change a little bit, so I'm not going to put them in order, but I know that the county's looking at both internal operations, so how the county operates, county trucks, county facilities, things like that. How do they address the emissions from county operations? And then they're going to look also at community resiliency, which is, as we were just talking about, wildfire resiliency, for example, but we also have flood risks here. So there's a lot of opportunity to think about how do we make sure that as our climate warms, because we've already seen a warming of 1 degree on average globally since like 1850, and we're experiencing some of the effects of that already. But in the county we have, for example, potential for sea level rise on the coast. So how do we, there are a whole bunch of impacts that the county will have to consider as a part of that, and there's a lot of opportunity there to do that kind of upstream risk mitigation, right? How do we make it less likely that people are going to lose property, or people are going to be harmed, or that the county is going to lose infrastructure, right? There's a whole bunch of opportunity there to make ourselves more resilient to those kinds of impacts. And then lastly is the mitigation that I was just speaking of in terms of greenhouse gases. So there's, I think from my perspective, the biggest opportunities at the county level are going to be in transportation. As I mentioned, transportation, when we look at the greenhouse gas footprint of us as a county, transportation is a really significant piece of that. And so making sure that we're investing in not only electric vehicle infrastructure, which I touched on briefly, but also alternatives to single occupant vehicles in the first place. So trying to make sure that our transit system is really robust, trying to make sure that people that want to walk and bike have that ability, recognizing that within the county, there are often very large distances that don't work for walking and biking, but where there are options, we need to make sure that those are really robust so that people want to do that can do that easily, like you said, making that the easy choice and
That's right.
safe and
Yeah.
convenient.
Yeah, I think another great example of this, I've been chatting about this in other Facebook Lives and candidate forums and so on. Again, I started working towards running for this office actually almost exactly a year to the day before the COVID shutdown. So in March, remember 2019? Remember March of 2019? Maybe you don't. But one of the things I talked a lot about was that there are a number of issues within the county as an organization. And actually, before I say this, I'm going to preface it with, I appreciate you outlining those 3 phases, because you're right, that internal county operations first, I think, is the right first step for a number of reasons, but most importantly, because there's the most traction and opportunity and autonomy to just make the changes.
Exactly.
And, I think generally as humans, but particularly in our community, we really value robust community participation and input. And there's that trade-off, which is that takes time. And as we talked about at the top of this conversation, in so many issues, but particularly around climate, we don't have a lot of time. And so doing as much as we can, while also putting these longer processes in place, but taking some actions now is really critically important. And so those internal operations are where we can best do that. And so one of the things I started talking about early on is the equity issues within the workforce, that not all county employees have the same conditions or opportunities to be supported and effective at work. And one of those great examples is people who are balancing caregiving responsibilities with work. And that if we could allow for more work from home, flexible scheduling, telecommuting options for people within the organization where that's practicable, right? Like obviously if you're parks maintenance, public works, you can't work from home.
Right.
But if you're part of an admin team and you're doing, you're processing payroll, for example. So this has been a conversation for a long time. And I think on the climate front, it's also important because we have county employees who are driving into these centralized work sites from all over, which means we need more parking and it's the vehicle miles on the road and so on. But when we have work from home and flexible schedule options, fewer people are traveling to and from a work site when they can do their work at home. And of course, there was a lot of resistance to this, but then COVID hit. And within a matter of about 2 weeks, I think something like 70% of county workforce whose job can be performed in decentralized locations was being performed that way. Yeah. So apparently we can.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the silver linings to COVID, right? Is we're learning about a lot of things that we formerly didn't think was possible. I had someone liken it to field doctors in wartime, where we can accelerate surgical procedures and so on, because there's such an urgent need to just make it happen, to just stay afloat at all.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right about transportation, but I think it also starts with the county's own workforce and how many vehicle miles are being traveled by staff. And if they're doing it in county-owned vehicles, those need to be electric vehicles. And if they're doing it in personal vehicles, how can we reduce those miles and double up trips? And
right. One of the options too, or opportunities that we haven't really used yet in the Eugene Springfield area, is congestion pricing. And so in places where we're looking at expanding a roadway system, for example, Highway 126 between Eugene and Veneta is currently, they're looking at what does that look like? What is that going to cost us? And there are, to the extent that there's leadership to do so, there are tools available that can reduce the congestion without expanding the highway, right? And one of the things you mentioned is flexible work schedules can allow people to come into work an hour later and avoid the peak of traffic, or leave an hour earlier, or what have you. So there are blends there that can help us avoid really high infrastructure costs.
Right.
Think about how we use our infrastructure more effectively, rather than just the blunt force of building more. And then the other thing, when we think about greenhouse gas mitigation at the county level, is that the county operates the landfill, right? And there's an opportunity there. I will certainly give credit that the county has for many, many, many years been capturing the methane that comes off of the landfill and using that to generate electricity, which is great. It's better than releasing that methane into the air, and then it reduces the amount of electricity used from other sources. But it's imperfect in that the time it takes to actually cap a cell in the landfill leaves quite a bit of time for quite a bit of methane to be released before that's actually sealed up and the methane is caught. And so really the most effective way for us to capture and reduce that methane is to prevent it from going to the landfill in the first place and using that organic material. So it's things like wood debris and food waste and anything that's plant or animal matter that goes in the landfill. Those are the things that are generating methane and creating the biggest problem in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think there's an opportunity there for the county as well to really lead. Again, they have been leading. They're already capping and capturing the methane, but there's more opportunity to keep those organic materials out of the landfill in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I've been talking quite a bit about that. And as you know, from my work over now going on 20 years with Food for Lane County and working on robust regional food systems, that when we have a more robust regional food system, we tend to have less food waste,
right.
Or better options for what to do with what would be considered food waste, the other channels and ways to use and repurpose that food and get it to folks who can't afford to purchase food or to reconfigure it into value-added products or and so on. And so I'm with you on that. I'm really excited about opportunities to look at our waste management and recycling programs overall. When I was on the budget committee, one of the things we get to do is tour the landfill. And so it's quite a thing. It's one thing you go zooming up and down I-5 and you see it off in the distance there, but to actually get up close and have a walk around and talk to the folks who work there and how committed they are to doing a really good job for all the reasons, but particularly also, I think we really do have some very committed folks working for Lane County, committed to our future, to our environment, to addressing climate change. So I'm really hopeful and excited about that.
Me too. I think the board, the Lane County board, opening the door to creating a climate action plan is a huge step in the right direction that enables a lot of those really thoughtful, committed people on the ground working for Lane County to really throw their best ideas forward and make sure that we're prioritizing appropriately.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, as always, these conversations go really quickly. We're down to just the last couple of minutes, and we didn't even get to dig into half the things that we thought we might. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you have any, in the last couple minutes, just sort of overall thought that you want to share with anybody who might be watching about just from your position of having worked on these issues for such a long time, and we're seeing a lot of individual habits and practices change, and we're seeing some policy changes as well, right? So that culture change and that policy change that both have to be in place. But if you have any just general thoughts for voters and just for folks in the community about where we are at this moment in time with right, 1 minute to say everything you ever wanted to say to people about climate change, climate action, and what this election means for our future. No pressure.
Yeah, ready? Go. Thank you for the invitation, both to be here and to provide some summary thinking here. Yeah, I have three thoughts. We have waited too late to take the action that now needs to be taken in a very short amount of time. Our actions are going to be compressed and it's going to be frustrating. If we do it right, like I mentioned, we have 30 years to get off of fossil fuels, and that is no small feat. It turns out to not be especially expensive, but it's difficult. There's a lot of culture change and a lot of system change that has to happen. And so it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of pushing. Our policy bodies in the past have not been willing to move quickly. I'm not saying that they don't want to do the changes that need to be done, but there has not been the capability of really turning local government ships very quickly, any government ships very quickly. They're just not designed to turn that quickly. And so if we're going to close the gap on our greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to take some real changes in the way we work together. I don't think the existing ways in which we're making decisions and implementing change are capable of doing what needs to be done. And so we're going to have to rethink how we work together, not just what we're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, voting is essential, and I encourage everybody to vote. As Lori appealed at the beginning, it's just crucial. It's not enough, it's not adequate, but it's an important step in moving us in the right direction. And of course, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't a huge fan of Lori Trieger. I think she's the right person for this job, and I can't wait for you to get in that seat and make the change that I know you're capable of making.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And what I will just say to voters and folks watching is this is, I mean, every election is a critically important election. I often shy away from using those hyperbolic, the election of our lifetimes and so on, because every election matters, and every election is the election of our lifetime, because we're all affected by who's at these leadership tables. And I really appreciate you coming in, Matt. And I know because over the time we've known each other, as I was thinking, oh, we first met when I was at Elche because Holly was involved with school food, but also safe routes to school and transportation issues and setting up habits and practices and a culture for future generations of how we get around by making it easier for kids to walk and bike to school. So we've been working on those issues together. It's just such a perfect example. I feel like our connection is a great example of how interconnected all these things are. Our food system, our transportation system, our waste stream, our utility companies. And so I'm just so excited if I can win this seat to get to work with you and bring that sort of holistic, interconnected lens and that public health approach of working upstream whenever possible to prevent harm and expense later downstream. So thank you for everything you're doing with our children's trust in the community generally, just existing the way you and your family do and modeling for us how that can look. And congratulations on winning your seat in the May primary so that you, unlike me, do not have to campaign for this general election cycle, which hopefully means it freed up some time for you to get involved and help with some other campaigns and make some other change happen. Cannot wait for you to be sworn in. So congrats again, future EWEB commissioner. And a brief nod to outgoing Commissioner Steve Mittal, whose seat Matt will be taking. Steve opted not to run again, and Steve is also a friend and a neighbor and just a really a good guy in our community, and appreciate him for his service on the EWEB board.
Agreed.
So, all right, thank you so much. Great to see you, Matt. Enjoy the rest of this sunny Sunday. Thanks to everybody who tuned in to watch. Do not forget to fill your ballot out. The whole thing, top to bottom, sign the back of the envelope. And at this point, please use one of the official Lane County drop boxes rather than the mail to ensure your ballot is received and counted on time. At the very latest, next Tuesday, week from Tuesday, November 3rd, 8 p.m. to get it in a drop box. Full list of drop boxes on the Lane County Elections website. You're also welcome to go to my website, loritrieger.com, click the contact button and get in touch with me if you have any questions about voting, about the issues I care about, or where you can safely return a ballot, or if you need help getting your ballot submitted. We're happy to help you make sure that your vote gets safely delivered and accurately counted in time. So thank you everyone for participating and by voting. And thanks again, Matt, for joining me this morning. Great to see you. All right, bye.